And we are being recorded. So welcome everybody. This is the Rootstock and Intacct overview session. We're going to be talking about how Rootstock and Intacct work together. And I will be going through this. My name is Allison Park. I'll also am joined here by Rylene Simpson, and we'll be introducing ourselves very shortly. So let's go ahead and get started. So today, the agenda is going to be, first we'll introduce ourselves so you get to know who you're hearing on the other end of the phone a little bit better. We'll review what our objectives are for this session. We're going to do a solution overview, basically looking at Rootstock and Intacct and Salesforce, making sure we all understand from a very high level how those solutions work together. And then we'll get into a little bit more detail on the interface itself, with just a bit of technical, just enough to hopefully clarify things for folks. And then we will round it out with some design considerations after we've gone through that interface detail and give you kind of some heads up of what to think about as you begin considering a Rootstock and Intacct interface. We will allow for questions and answers as they come up. Please do ask questions as we go along, but we will make time at the very back end of the session to answer any of your questions. It's always great when we get questions because certainly if you have the question, I'm sure others do as well. And then we'll have a couple of websites for you as resources so that you have that for reference. Okay, so first, in the way of introductions, this voice on the other end of the phone, I did add our pictures just so you could picture us hopefully talking and make it a little bit more interesting presentation. I am Allison Park, the practice lead for Rootstock here at BT Partners. I'm sharing with my LinkedIn address if you're interested in more of my background. I did start in manufacturing on the client side of the table. I met Rootstock actually back in 2010 as a prospective customer, and in as much as it's on the Salesforce platform and from a technical perspective, that was real interesting to me. I stayed in touch with Rootstock over the years, and then starting early last year, we started the Rootstock practice here at BT Partners, and I've been working alongside folks at Rootstock since then as part of the Rootstock practice. So Rylene, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
So I'm Rylene Simpson. I'm a senior solution architect with Rootstock, and I've been in manufacturing and distribution software for a really long time, too many years to mention. And before that, I actually worked in manufacturing plants as production planner and also actually cost accountant. So long background, and hope that I hope that I can be helpful today.
Yes, absolutely. And Rylene and I have worked together on a few projects as well, so you're a good wealth of information. So certainly, I'm sure both of us are available to anyone after this meeting if you have any questions. So please do reach out. So for today's objective, we're not going to get very deep in the weeds. We really wanted to make sure that we gave you the understanding of that integration that exists between Rootstock and Intacct, so that as you have an opportunity come up, you can determine if that prospective customer is a good fit for the Rootstock Intacct integration, and both solutions would be complementary for this particular customer. Certainly, again, if you have more detailed questions after we get through this, and you want to bring in more technical folks, please do so. I think that as we're working through this, you'll see that we're going to cover the basics, but I wouldn't be surprised if you have more questions, and that's kind of the start of the conversation is today. And one of the questions that comes up sometimes is looking at Rootstock, which is entirely built on the Salesforce platform, and Intacct. Since they are two different platforms, you know, what's the benefit of having solutions that work so closely together on two different platforms? And to me, one of the great strengths between those is the app exchange and the marketplace with Intacct, that you have ways to expand both Rootstock and the Intacct integration to other partners as it makes sense for that particular solution, for that particular prospect, because now you have, I think, upwards of 3,000 apps on the app exchange for Salesforce and many other complementary apps on the Intacct platform. So you're really leveraging the strengths of both platforms so that the customer really has a wide breadth of things that they can do across the entire solution. And that vital connection between Rootstock and Intacct is really the foundation on which you build the entire solution. So certainly worth exploring as you come into a particular opportunity is looking at potentially some more complementary apps that you may want to consider for that particular installation, either at the time of the initial implementation or later on down the track. So those two platforms working together is a pretty compelling argument for leveraging the Rootstock Intacct integration. So to give you a little bit more of an overview between the functionality for Rootstock and for Intacct, we've got a subway map here, and I think it's a great way of illustrating what kind of functionality and where it sits. Depending on the resolution of your screen, we've got three colors actually. The blue is the Salesforce operation, and that is marketing campaigns, leads, accounts, and opportunities. And at the far right-hand side is cases and service level agreements, service repair, and field service in some cases. Those are the parts where Rootstock touches upon Salesforce functionality. Many times I'm asked if I have to have Salesforce in order to have Rootstock. And no, you do not have to have the Salesforce CRM. So those blue areas are something that are completely optional, depending on the customer, depending on what their need is. And then Rootstock sits on top of that. It's part of the Salesforce platform. So you can have just Rootstock. They will still log in through Salesforce, but all of the functionality for Rootstock will be available to them because Rootstock is what they call OEM application. And then the Rootstock pieces the Intacct pieces come in with the green area. The links through this interface over to Intacct's accounts payable, Intacct's general ledger and financial reporting, and Intacct's accounts receivable. So this is how they all link together. Brilene, I'm not sure if you have any other insights as far as that you'd like to share as far as this subway map of functionality.
Well, I think, I mean, there's a lot more to be said, but maybe when, as we go along, we'll find out areas of interest and go from there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
So keeping in mind this image here of all these nexuses, we're going to start to drill in a little bit more into each of these and how they interact from a technical nature. So I'm going to start with accounts payable, and Rootstock handles at the very beginning of the AP process requisitions, turns those into purchase orders, and then obviously once those purchase orders come in, they get received in through purchase receipts. There is a three-way match that is done within Rootstock, and you can process the vendor invoice. Once that vendor invoice has been processed, then you can actually push it over into Intacct from Rootstock, and Intacct receives through an API a create bill. So that's those AP bills come over. And that is, I guess, as simple as it happens, but understanding this flow as we move through each of these 3 points, I think is what the important point I want to make sure I communicate today, so that you understand that Rootstock starts at the beginning of these transactions, tracks them, and then pulls them over into Intacct. So that interface is, as I mentioned, using the Intacct API, the specific API. So for your technical folks, that I think helps better the understanding of how that rolls over. The next area that this interface creates is through the general ledger. Rootstock handles the subledger tracking of costs and movements throughout the system. That subledger is linked to a general ledger within Intacct, and it's worthwhile to note, as we're talking about it right now, that when you go to set up Rootstock, you do need to first and foremost have your chart of accounts available within Intacct. So Intacct is really that foundation that Rootstock then uses to match up its subledger processes to, and then pushes that over through an API create GL transaction over into Intacct. So again, as we are moving through each of these transactions, keep in mind that it all starts in Rootstock, and then as it's completed, at the point where I need to pay a vendor or I need to upload a journal entry, I pass that over over into Intacct to manage that from there on forward. And then in the accounts receivable, this is the last of the three main areas where those images overlapped. From Rootstock, it handles the order entry, the sales order entry, including quotes. Quote is simply a sales order that has a quote check mark in that object. Then that Rootstock also then handles any resulting work orders, either from the sales order or directly as a manual work order, and the production involved with the process. It handles the pick, the pack, the ship, and potentially the invoice. Depending on how you set it up, you can send over to the Intacct API the sales invoices or the AR invoice. So it uses each of those respective APIs to pass that over, and that depends on how you want to design it. For that particular prospect, what makes the most sense in their processes, whether to use either of those API processes, either the sales invoice or the AR invoice. AR invoice is a little bit simpler and more straightforward, but you may want to take advantage of some of the functionality that you have in Intacct by bringing it over as a sales invoice. I covered very quickly those three integration points. Arlene, any 2 cents that maybe I glossed over that would be worth mentioning?
No, I think it sounds perfect.
Okay, good, good. So given these three interchanges, some of the big design considerations to think about as you start to consider a Rootstock Intacct integration is, where are you going to be doing the reporting? How are you going to share customers? How are you going to share vendor information, product information, units of measure, potentially projects, depending on the customer? What dimensions are you going to pass over? Dimensions, by the way, Rootstock has 8 dimensions out of the box that it can pass over to Intacct. And then whether or not you're going to use the Salesforce connector. In many cases, you do want to use the Salesforce connector. That is a separate module from Intacct, and that can handle the customer syncing and the product syncing. So that may be something that's worthwhile to invest in. I understand there is an update coming out for the Salesforce connector from Intacct, so that may be even more useful and have more options of things that you want to share between Rootstock, which sits on the Salesforce platform, and Intacct. I think the underlying point that I want to make here is that it's real important as this integration has been built to be able to upfront, before within the sales process, determine that these two solutions are going to work together and how they're going to pass information between each other, so that everyone's comfortable that we are addressing the requirements of the customer. And when you determine that up front, then it becomes a much easier process in setting that up and making sure that you're leveraging to the out-of-the-box strengths of the Rootstock Intacct integration. So with that, any questions as we are just about ready to wrap up? It's a real quick and easy integration here that we've dove into. And you can unmute yourself and share with the group if you want. And assuming no questions, Rylene, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the group as far as things to consider when they're looking at a Rootstock integration to Intacct?
You know, I always like, I mean, I know you probably don't want to toot the horn of the Intacct side, but I think that my comment is that we have found the Intacct financials to be really robust and rugged. And so I think it's it's kind of a 1-2 punch. I think it's a terrific combination. Yeah, but I think that covered it pretty nicely.
Yes, and I agree, Rylene. It's wonderful when we have Intacct with its robustness. I think that's the exact right word. When you have that complexity, especially within a manufacturing and distribution company, where even from an Intacct perspective, its distribution and inventory functionality is not as robust as Rootstock's. The Rootstock Intacct pairing really makes a wonderful app. It's 100% in the cloud, which I think a lot of customers are starting to look for these days. So yes, I think it's a powerful combination. Okay, any questions? Anything else that we went too quickly over that you think we should cover in a little bit more detail? Well, then with that, I just wanted to leave you with the websites. Certainly BT Partners, we have some information on Rootstock and who we are, but then Rootstock has a great number of white papers and case studies and some videos, so you can actually kind of sink your teeth into what the functionality is within Rootstock and start to understand what it can do for your manufacturing and distribution customers. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to us, both either through the rootstock.com or the btpartners.com website, and we'll be happy to answer any more questions. And certainly if you want a more in-depth or very specific consultation on how this integration works, you can reach out to either one of us. BT Partners is a Rootstock partner, and Rootstock does also have direct relationships with Intacct partners as well. So with that, if there aren't any other questions, I will go ahead and end the recording. I will make this recording available to everybody who's signed up and who attended today as well. So you can refer back to it and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Allison. Great job.